Enter Miss Quantum. She's a more literal take on the idea of an evil teacher. She's a former villain that decided to trade in evil for a career as a full-time educator for up-and-coming heroes. She picked teaching elementary school-aged heroes specifically. This is the first formative step in their schooling and, arguably, the most important part because of how it shapes their attitude towards learning and growing later in life. However their experiences shake out here, students will either move on to an institution like Point Prep, or more homegrown mentor-student situations like Rad and Enid at Gar's Bodega. Miss Quantum places her full class in a pressure cooker. Everything is a potential challenge. Everything is going to be as difficult or rigorous as she deems appropriate or necessary. It's especially interesting to play some level of compare and contrast between Miss Quantum's philosophy towards teaching with Foxtail's approach. While Point Prep students have a higher level of responsibility and autonomy, Foxtail still pushes for classes that install high levels of obey, comply, and compete. Students see each other as measuring sticks or gauges for success. The underlying goal for Point Prep under Foxtail is to create competent cog-in a machine soldiers. Being a point hero is becoming a capitalist brand of usable, expendable, and uniform. Miss Quantum approaches everyone with the same level of high expectations and intensity. Success is gauged by how impressed she is and her exclusive discretion. Granted, her method is very demanding and stressful. The Sabbatical shows her attempts at tailoring her approach based on individual student needs. Unlike Foxtail, she recognizes the need for adjusting how she teaches and the value of a more individualized approach versus a one-size-fits-all mold. A key part in what friction there is between herself and Dendi is her ongoing struggle to challenge Dendi in a fashion comparable to other students. She wants to make sure all of her students feel the need to go above and beyond and exercise what creative thinking or research needed to meet her challenge. Most of her approaches work for the majority of the class, but Dendi needs something outside of what she knows how to do or has developed thus far. Part of her sharing how frustrated she is reveals that she enjoys teaching Dendi. It's refreshing to learn something from her students as much as they do from her. She makes a point of memorizing and using her students' preferred names, and she employs incentives like fun stickers. But these positive touches are undermined by a lack of a more empathetic and compassionate approach, intense punishments, and an overwhelming workload. Miss Quantum absolutely carried over elements of her villain days to the classroom. There's a one-off gag about an unruly student dangling from the underside of the school. Look at what Boxman does after he captures Rad, Enid, and KO, ties them up, and suspends them above a boiling vat of lava. Instead of antagonizing her hero rival, Miss Quantum uses a classic tie-up-my-victim routine as an absurd method for classroom disciplinary action. There's also a one-off scene where Miss Quantum casually pulls out a cartoony-looking ray gun and uses it to post a notice about the upcoming school science fair. I think it's safe to assume that a goofy sci-fi ray gun is a staple in a villain's toolkit. Professor Venomous whips out his own ray gun in one of his few non-shadowy form fights. And there's another sequence where Boxman pulls out his own ray gun too. Since Boxman and Venomous are the villains with the most screen time and established villainy in show, I see their antics as a guideline for what's considered Saturday morning cartoon villain and a genuine threat. While her track record as a bad apple is unknown, Miss Quantum trends closer to what Boxman does on an average day. Boxman has moments as an incompetent jobber villain that show glimpses that he could switch sides if he honestly wanted to. He's mean, petty, and short-sighted. Even in his bigger moments, he'd stop at destroying the plaza or thoroughly demoralizing someone. In Miss Quantum's case, she was probably a jobber villain that saw stronger value and fulfillment in being a teacher than staying a losing villain. The villain tendencies stayed and became the foundation for how she teaches. Plotting a grand scheme to surprise and befuddle a hero became setting up a complicated lesson plan, or employing surprise pop quizzes to keep kids on their toes. Robbing banks or general villain heists turned into nights grading papers. Challenging heroes resulted in loss after loss or jail time. Teaching students results in watching that student become more resilient, patient, and stronger. There's a more satisfying result from all that effort and attention Miss Quantum dedicates to her new venture. But even with a more benevolent goal, again, Miss Quantum doesn't approach students with empathy or compassion. She comes across as intimidating, unreadable, and at times, cruel. When Dendi expresses how frustrated she is by Miss Quantum, it's an interesting take on the antagonistic teacher framework. Dendi is characterized as very observant and detail-oriented. She can draw up a blunt and specific character portrait of just about anyone, with enough knowledge on their general behavior, and their POW card. But Miss Quantum is an enigma and obstacle, instead of an interesting case study like everyone else. She actually has similar issues to Miss Quantum when it comes to understanding others' emotions, empathy, and the little parts of social nuance or cues that help indicate how someone has received certain overtures. It's not from a lack of wanting to do so. In Dendy's case, it's part of her personal challenges as someone on the autistic spectrum. Miss Quantum may have similar experiences, but there isn't enough screen time or specific character interactions for me to make that call. Dendy has been a point of view character in several episodes, and has several key scenes playing off of KO as a very empathetic character with a high emotional IQ. As for Miss Quantum, her sometimes thoughtless approach to how her students feel translates as her still struggling to switch between tactless villain and thoughtful teacher. Villains aren't necessarily a cruel and wholly evil monolith. It's more that Miss Quantum spent enough time trying to fill the template of a nasty villain that her default is stern, mean, and immovable. She is a picture of what a reformed villain in this world could look like, rough edges and all. Her POW card shows that she's still at level -1. When she clashes with Dendy, it's a meeting of two very similar personalities. If Dendy didn't play off of KO, she's not morally bankrupt enough to become the deliberate piece of work Professor Venomous is, but she could believably become like Miss Quantum during her days as the bad apple. There's something that villainy offered that appealed to Miss Quantum at some point. Being a villain opens up avenues for more questionable experiments and results Dendy was enticed by when she experimented on TKO. KO helps ground Dendy and remind her what her ethics are. In a nutshell, Dendy's support network is part of what keeps her on her personal journey towards becoming IT support on Mr. Gar's hero team later. When Miss Quantum entertains a return to villainy, she claims that she feels more free. She uses a bad apple as an excuse to seek revenge and directly challenges the school board's decision to contract with Books more. The truth is, she no longer sees herself as an actual villain. This time around, her role as a villain is depicted more as, "I'll be the monster you see me as." From the cartoon's hero and villain world framework, this is a sign of how much personal growth and work Miss Quantum has invested in her reforming. The bad apple is a worst-case outcome. It comes from a place of desperation rather than a true relapse. The So-Badical is an on-the-nose allegory about teachers feeling powerless in the face of budget cuts that lead to inferior teaching materials. Teachers feel boxed in by tests or standards that emphasize rote memorization more than encouraging critical thinking or providing quality education. As a teacher, Miss Quantum doesn't have the social capital or standing to push back on bureaucratic missteps. She felt frustrated enough that she decides to risk her position in the existing system, if not outright leave it, to stop and break up the corrupt forces interfering with education, no matter what the cost. This is further echoed by Miss Quantum saying she feels like Dendy and her students still see her as a bad guy, so she might as well be one. Miss Quantum is a stand-in for the no-win balancing act a lot of teachers find themselves in. There's no way to satisfy the school board, parents that have wildly varied takes on what teachers are responsible for, and the students themselves that feel trapped or misplaced in a poorly designed school system. Teachers generally want to do right by everyone. They want to help and provide a step up for the next generation. More often than not, they're not given the resources they need and have to fill in or meet a lot of the ridiculous expectations themselves. This tends to come at the cost of their mental health, emotional bandwidth, and even pocket money. Here, Boxmore serves as a very direct threat to quality education. The issue is generally resolved by stopping and unmasking the villain. It's very noteworthy that Miss Quantum did have to take matters into her own hands, and that the bad apple is reframed as a hero for directly derailing and stopping bureaucratic bullshit. This could be seen as an indirect compliment to what Dark Plaza tackles. Some solutions require opposition and strong pushback from outside of the existing system. Ultimately, Miss Quantum returns as a teacher, and it's implied that her feedback and concerns will be taken much more seriously. It's the most idealistic solution, but that works for what kind of stories this cartoon wants to tell, and themes it works with. The more important piece in everything, though, are KO and Dendy telling Miss Quantum that her efforts are seen, heard, and appreciated. She isn't powerless. Her role as a teacher has made an impact and helped both of them personally, regardless of the lack of thanks or introspection. There's emphasis on checking in with the at-wits-end teacher, as well as offering a hand to help them stand back up. While Miss Quantum's struggle isn't as visceral or layered as watching KO help Mr. Gar navigate his personal trauma or other similar storylines, there's still the same focus on how symbiotic a teacher-student or mentor-mentee relationship can and should be. Despite their respective issues, Miss Quantum has played a role in Dendy's journey as much as Dendy has with her ongoing one. And it packs that much more of a punch because Miss Quantum has a lot to workshop and being more earnest with her students. Thanks for watching! If you enjoy my videos and want to keep tabs on what I upload next, consider subscribing, ringing the bell, and more importantly, add me to your RSS reader. It's old, but it's a good way to avoid algorithm nonsense and see everything me or any of your other favorite creators put out there. Or well, keep better tabs on it. If you're in a spot where you can, consider donating to my Patreon to help keep the lights on, as well as making videos like this one. I also recently shared some of my scrap scripts and content. Get a glimpse of what my cutting room floor looks like.